Hey everyone, so in this video we are going to add two new functions. One, we're going to add a fuel gauge along the bottom of the screen. I'd actually totally forgotten about this until someone pointed out in the comments, and that in the original arcade there's a fuel gauge. It depletes over time, but it gets replenished when you destroy a fuel tank. So to do that, we're going to add a new variable. The second thing, missiles actually have two different point values when they destroy them. 1 point value when they're on the ground, 1 point value if they have launched. So both of these are really quick, really easy, so I'd figure I'd combine them into one video. Also, if you just watched the previous video, you're probably going to realize this looks somewhat different, and that's because it's actually been a couple months since I worked on the previous video, and I tend to tinker with these projects even when I'm done with them, and to see if I come up with anything that's worth displaying. Having said that, nothing that I added in between these two videos will impact what I'm about to do in this one. Okay, so let's add that new variable for fuel. So in the shipcon script, we're just going to add public static float, and we'll call this fuel level. And we'll start it at 100, and I'll explain in a minute why 100. So now we need this to be depleted over time. So basically this value just needs to get smaller on a consistent basis. So how do we do that? Well, we just use another coroutine. We already have some IEnumerator routines. We're just going to add another one because, as we've already demonstrated, this is the way that you have a task be performed regardless of frame rate. That is based on time, not frame rate. So we're just going to create IEnumerator, and it will be deplete fuel yield return new. And again, don't worry too much about what yield return new means. Just know you have to type it, and that what you really care about on this line is this, and that is wait 4 seconds. So this is purely game balance. I know I say that a lot, but there's nothing absolutely right or wrong about the number you use, as long as you don't make it impossible, as long as you don't have fuel burn too quickly and they crash. So what we'll do, we'll have this, we'll put it at 2 seconds just so we don't have to wait too long to see something happen. And then what we'll do, we will have that new variable. So fuel level minus equals 1. That is, the current value of fuel level is going to be reduced by 1. So take its current value and minus 1 from it. Now, we need this to be recursive, so we need it to come back up to the top and run again. So start coroutine deplete fuel, parentheses, and there we go. We've now created an endless loop. Now we need to repeat this, and I always forget to do this, in the start section. So we want the count to start as soon as the ship is instantiated. Now what we're going to do, I'm just going to take a moment to put in the typical debug log. That way we can just make sure that the number is indeed decreasing over time. Oops, not there. What am I doing? There. So debug.log, and it's going to be not deplete fuel, it's going to be fuel level. There we go. You can see that the number is indeed decreasing. And a brief splice there. I needed to take a minute to import the image I thought I had, but I hadn't. It's just a white rectangle. So what we're going to do, first thing you need to do, you need to change the pivot. So by default, it's the center. The problem is when we scale this object, that means it would scale towards the center. In other words, it would scale from the left and the right. We don't want that. We want it to scale from the right all the way to the left. So rather than scaling inward from both the left and right, it will scale sideways only from the right. As you can see, I already made that change. It defaults to center, so change it to top left. And then what we'll do is we'll take that image, we'll drag and drop it into the main camera. It creates a new object. Now, when you make an object a child to a parent, these coordinates become relative. So if I change that to 0, it's now on the screen. So even though the camera is at -21, these are relative coordinates. So it's 0 to the camera as a horizontal position of 0. So we'll just slide this over because, again, it's left aligned now. Left pivot to be more technical, but again, it will control as far as its positioning and its scaling. So now what we need to do, we now need to have the scale of this be based on the fuel variable that we created. So what we're going to do, we want the ship to be aware of this object. So what we're going to do, the ship, we will create a new public transform, and it will be fuel gauge. And I think I spelled it wrong. So we'll save that. Go to our ship. And there's that new variable. So we'll take the fuel and put it there. So it's a child to the camera, but the ship is aware of it. That's, I think, the simplest way to describe it when you create a reference to it like that is you're making one object aware of another. So now we just need to have the ship script change the scale of that object. You could do that, say, with every frame because you're applying the value of the gauge, but you're not actually changing the value of the fuel. This is getting changed every 2 seconds, I believe. So what we're doing, we will do fuel gauge dot transform dot local scale equals new vector 2, and it's really X that we want to change. So it's going to be fuel gauge, and it's going to be, sorry, not fuel gauge. We want fuel level. Fuel level. Now, this starts at 100, so we want this to break down to no greater than 1 because scale works on 0.00 to 1.0. Well, you can go beyond 1, but no need to. We don't want it to go above the normal, the originating size. So fuel level times 0.01 F, and Y will stay at its value of 1. Just let me think through that for a second, make sure I didn't make any mistakes. So we want, this is 100. If I multiply it by 0.01, this becomes 1. So yeah, so it's a scale of 1. As this decreases, this will therefore become less than 1. Okay, if I didn't make a mistake, that should now have the gauge reduce in size. It gets checked every frame, but again, we're only changing the variable every 2 seconds. There we go. So just like that, you've added a fuel gauge. Now what you can do is that when you move forward, you could burn fuel faster. So let's go ahead and do that. So that would be in the control section. And that means we're going to need another variable. So I think we can make that private. And it will be private float. And this will be fuel mod. And it will start off at 0. So what we're going to do, this equation down here, we're saying -1. But if you're using thrusters, then what you want to do, you want to modify it so it is reducing the additional amount from the thrusters. So what we'll do, we want a -1, but we want a -1 plus that new fuel mod. So it defaults as 0, so 1 plus 0 is still 1. So now what we need to do, we want to check to see if you're holding D. That is the button that makes you accelerate. So here's D. So fuel mod. And we'll make this something crazy like 10, just so it's really obvious. Now, the only problem is you can already see a way to exploit this. So what happens is this, if it is not being held, well, we're going to, obviously, when you let go of the button, this has to be set back to 10. But what happens is you could just tap the button before this gets executed, because again, this is only happening every 2 seconds. So you could do like a rapid tap and probably get away with not using extra fuel. That's a game balance issue. You can decide if you want to chase after that. So let's just run like this before we do the correction for letting go of the button. So if we're holding D, this should, there we go. The other way that you can get around it is right now we're using 2-second increments. You could make this much faster. You could make this like 1/10 of a second, but what it gets reduced by only like 5% of this amount then, whatever. So in other words, you reduce the time, you reduce the change, but by reducing the time, there's less likely for people to use that exploit. Okay, so now we just have to, when you let go of D, that new fuel mod has to be set to 0. So trying to think the best way to do this. So we'll put this in a couple places. So we're not going to have you use fuel if you're pressing backwards. You could if you want. Again, that's kind of game balance, but I just want to make sure that we have the functionality in here so that when you change what buttons you're pressing, it doesn't, that we want to make sure to adjust. So D and A, so if neither one of them are being pressed, because this is not, so they're not being pressed, then fuel mod will be set to 0. Okay, so let's do this again. Holding D, obviously. Now I let go. And there we go. It's back to the destroy the ship got destroyed. That's why I stopped counting. I have to avoid the okay. So far looking good. Now we'll let go. Well, it's going to let go, but more missiles. There we go. So back to normal consumption. Okay, so last thing we need to do now, when you destroy a fuel tank, you need this amount to be increased. So we need to go to the script for the fuel tank, and for that, what we're going to do, it's just adding a new variable. Or should I say modifying. So this is already looking for the collision and destruction. So this is the tank con script. And this is just saying that if it's been clicked on, excuse me, not clicked on, if it's been collided with by any of these objects, then the tank gets destroyed. So we're just going to do ship con, because that's where the variable is declared. So ship con dot fuel level, we'll do plus 10. Now this is going to create another issue where you don't want to go, whoops, plus equals, sorry about that. So shipcon is the script where the variable is declared. That's the variable, and that's how much we're increasing it by, the value by. So the only thing is you have to be careful that you don't let fuel level go over 100%. So there's nothing in there now, but I just wanted to, again, we do this in an iterative manner. If I could actually hit one. There we go. And you could see that the gauge did indeed increase. The second one didn't increase because, again, the ship got destroyed and the script is attached to the ship. Okay, so now we just don't want it to go over 100%. So for shipcon, what we can do, the gauge is updated in the update section. So before it does this, we'll simply say if fuel level is greater than 100, then fuel level equals 100. And I'm not going to bother running it again. That's simple and self-explanatory. We're saying that if this number has gone above the upper limit, bring it back to the upper limit. So we said that the other thing that we're going to do, we're going to add multiple values for missiles, and that is pretty easy. So for the missiles, we just need to go to the missile script, which is right here. So we'll just move this over to the other ones that we're using. So again, the on trigger enter is where the collision is being detected, and it says total score is equal to this. So we just need this to change to be replaced by a variable. So we'll just call this can be private because I don't think any other object needs to read this variable. So private, and let me just check to see what total score is. Total score is an int, okay? So I want to be consistent. So private int enemy score, and it defaults to, let's say, 100. And what happens, this is the section that makes the missile take off. So all we have to do is have this change for when this happens. So enemy score is now equal to 200. And now you replace this with that new variable. That should do it. So it's 100. So it's 100 when it's on the ground, 200 when it's in the air. It's going to be a little bit dicey because I can only destroy a missile, or else it's going to be hard to get the count right. So let's do that. There we go. That was 200. And we need to destroy one before it takes off. There we go. Okay, so I think that should do it for this video. I hope you found this helpful. Like I said, you probably saw a few things running that weren't in the previous video because, again, After I stop recording a video and I don't have any requests, I tinker around to see if there's anything else that people might be interested in. In this case, someone asked for the fuel gauge, so now you've got it. So if there's any other requests, just let me know. I still have the project and I can add other things, and I hope you found this useful, and please enjoy the rest of your day.